Hello, in today's video, we are going to hash things out with hashes. Let's get to it. If you're new here, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe below so you can get more content like this. So let's go ahead and talk about hashes. And hashes and arrays are actually similar in certain ways, but they're actually used differently in a whole different data type itself. And we'll go ahead and list out those key points where what the differences between the two are and what you're able to with hashes here. So essentially what a hash is technically an object of key value pairs. And the way they are, you can technically use them as an array, but that's a whole nother topic. We will actually cover arrays versus hashes in a totally different video. But just note that hashes are objects of key value pairs. And I'll show you what that looks like and what I mean by that. But first, how they are defined. How they are defined is that you can use the class of hash.new, and you can also most likely see them inside of these curly brace set here. And with these certain areas, this is very dependent on what language you're working in. In most cases, it would be with this set of curly braces here. So I will actually be using this now going forward for this presentation. So let me show you what I mean by key value pairs. So within those set of curly braces, or you can call them mustache brackets, they are a key and a value. And with that key and a value, the key represents what you are referring to, and the value is the actual input value for what you are referring to. For this specific case, for this hash, we're actually having a hash of a person. And the hash has keys of what the person has. In this case, they have first name, last name, and age. It's just attributes that a person has. The values of each one of those keys are the actual values of what their first name is, what their last name is, and what their age is. So in this case, their first name is John, last name is Doe, and age is 34. So that is key value pairs. It's just sets of keys on the left here and values on the right. And they most represent attributes and separate by commas. Now the difference between these three items here is actually what you're able to define a hash with. And again, this is depending on your language. These are the most common three ways. You can see that the key and also the symbol after it is a little bit different in each and every single one of these, but the values all remain the same. And this is really dependent on either new or old syntax as well during your system programming language. So you'll have a key here followed by a colon for this first pattern. The other one is a string for the key followed by a that arrow, which is the equal sign and the less than sign together, and then the value. And the final way is that you can reference them by numbers, which is 1, 2, 3, as well as an octothorpe. And those are the different ways that you can define a hash with the key value pairs. But all of these three ways are actually meaning the exact same thing. The difference between the three of them is how we pull out data. So how we pull out data for the first part is that whatever the key is the colon and then the key name. For the second pattern is the same thing, but without the colon, and then inside of a string, whatever the key is there. And that will give you the value of John. And for the last one, there's actually two ways. You can actually just reference a number, or you can reference the string of the number. So again, those three mean the exact same thing. It's just how we're defining them are different and how we're pulling information out. That's the difference between them. Very common way is you have your key followed by a colon with the key value pairs defined like that. So each key value pair is separated by a comma. So if you want to get the first name, it would be colon first, last name colon last, and age colon age with this setup pattern here. And this is the most common way that I've been using and I've seen out there with hashes used. But if you have seen these other styles of defining hashes, just note that they mean the exact same thing. It's just the way they are referenced are different. So you can actually translate them if you wanted to back and forth between those different styles. So let's talk about how we would run logic on a hash with a key value pair. When you are referring to the value, or if you want to do anything with the value, you have to refer to it by the key, and the key is on the left here. And usually keys should be descriptive. It shouldn't be X, Y, and Z. It should be something more descriptive of what represents the data. So that's why this is first, last, and H instead of X, Y, and Z. But if you want to, let's say, increment the age by 1 or change the age, maybe is the user's birthday, you would grab it like how you would grab any value. So the name of the hash itself or what the hash is referenced to. Then you would have the key that you want to grab followed by a colon with this pattern. Again, make sure you follow whatever pattern is your hash is defined in, and that will give you 34. But if I want to add an addition to that number, then what I would do is I would set the age. So it would be hash age like this equal to the current age, which is what we are currently grabbing like this, plus 1. That might look a little bit weird, but what it represents is that, let's say that when we are grabbing this here, that means that we are grabbing the key of age, right? That is the key value pair of age. And we are setting that equal to the value, which in this case is 34 plus 1, which is 35 now. So running through all that logic, it will be the hash age is equal to 35. That's essentially what this line of code means. And that's how you would run logic. You would reference it by the key value pair by just having the colon key here so you can get the value and do some sort of logic on it. If you have a hash and you want to run logic on all of the key value pairs, then you could technically run the logic by grabbing the keys like this with colon first, last, and H. And again, this works if it's a small hash, and it also works if you know how many items or what you're wanting to pull out of the hash. But if you want to pull out everything from the hash, every single key value pair, this doesn't really work and it's not as efficient. You actually have to do something else. Like for example, if you don't know the amount of key value pairs it is, or if you have 50 key value pairs in this hash, you don't want to do this 50 times. It might be hard to keep track of all the keys that you need to bring in. So a better way to do it is actually what we learned in our last video when we talked about arrays, is we need to iterate through each of the key value pairs. What iteration means is that we actually are going through each of the key value pairs and then we are performing logic on them. And there's multiple ways you can do this. There's not one true way. It's just whatever's more efficient in your case. But you can use a each loop or iterator when you are doing this. In this case, I'm using an each do loop. So with this each do loop, I have the reference hash here, which represents the whole entire hash. Dot each, which means that we're going through each key value pair. And with the key, which is the left side, and the value, I'm performing some sort of logic here. So in this case, for each of the keys and the values, I'm printing them out in a string interpolation, which means that I'm grabbing the key, whatever it represents, and printing it here, and the value and whatever it represents, printing it here. So it will print out the key is first, the value is John. And in the next key value pair, the key is last, and the value is Doe, etc. So that's how this logic works. And this is actually much more efficient because this works for however big your hash is and however you want to print out all of your key value pairs. So this is a better way to print out things if you don't know what key value pairs they have, or if you don't know the exact size of the hash, or if there's too many key value pairs in the hash. But just to be more specific, these values here are actually just placeholders. It really doesn't matter what you call them, but really what they represent, that is what matters, because the left is always the key and the right is always the value. So as long as you know that this is the key and this is the value, you can actually change this to make more sense of your case. For our case, we actually have a person here, and the key, we shouldn't just say key, Each of those keys represents an attribute, right? The attribute of the person or what the person has. So we can actually change that to be attribute here. And the value, I think the value works in this case as well, and we can leave that as B. So it's good to be descriptive more than anything when you are using iterators. And just note that this is always a key and this one is always the value. So let's wrap up what we have so far. So we know some keywords. Hash is just a key value pairs. Essentially what they look like is they have a key on the left and the value on the right. So each of those are key value pairs. And they are also wrapped in a curly brace, which is the most common way. Iteration is when we go through each key value pair of the hash and we perform some sort of logic. In our previous example, we're going through each key value pair and printing out both the key and the value inside of a word sentence here. So a good use case for hashes is actually the same use case that I use for arrays, is that with users are most likely represented in a hash because they have multiple attributes that they have, such as name, email, age, password, etc., to represent the user. So if you have an array of hashes, what you would do is you would actually treat this as outside in. Very similar if you have a hash within a hash or array of hashes or hash of arrays, things like that, you will always go outside in. So first treat this as an array first. So if I want to get Bob, I would get users, box bracket 0, because that's the first position. And then you would treat it as the hash in this case, right? So if I want to grab his name, it would be box bracket colon name here to get out Bob. So that is the typical use case of hashes and what you are able to do with hashes. In our next video series, we'll compare both arrays and hashes to see which one you would use over the other. If you have any questions about anything about this or any of the previous videos and any of the concepts, then feel free to leave a comment below and I will get into those questions as soon as I can and answer them. Now that's everything with hashes and I will see you all next time. See ya!